Well, hello and welcome to the ACMA Google Hangout. My name's Pip Blackwood and I'm a policy officer here at the ACMA. Today we've come together to talk about children's television. TV for kids that's made in Australia has a great reputation. One of the reasons Australian kids TV is of such a high quality is the requirement the programs are made especially for children. It's not just Aussie boys and girls that get to enjoy these programs. Shows produced in Australia are seen by kids around the world, and often to critical acclaim. There's a reason shows like Mortified, Lockie Leonard and Saddle Club have fans from Sydney to Santiago. Many people don't realise the ACMA plays a key role between shows being made and shows going to air. Before a show can be broadcast and count for C&P quotas, it needs to be classified by the ACMA. Usually a producer or sometimes a broadcaster will submit an application to the ACMA for a C for children or P for preschool classification. The ACMA then makes an assessment and sees if that program meets the requirements under the Children's Television Standards or CTS. To make this application process easier, the ACMA has just launched a guide to children's television applications for C&P applicants. So that's why we're having this Google Hangout today, to chat about the CTS and the C&P application process. Joining me today are Suzanne Ryan, CEO and Executive Producer from SLR Productions. Suzanne produces some of Australia's most successful kids TV shows, including Gasp and I've Got a Rocket. Hello, Suzanne. Sherry Botcher, Head of Children's Programming at Network 10. Sherry has a unique role as both a broadcaster and an applicant for C&P classification. Welcome, Sherry. Rebecca Mostyn, Program Manager, Production and Industry at Screen Australia. And Rebecca is one of the authors of the recent Child's Play report looking at the Australian kids TV industry. And Emma Bain, Senior Policy Officer in the Broadcasting Standards section. Emma's part of the team that actually assesses the applications for C&P classification. So thank you everybody for joining me in the Hangout this morning. Suzanne, I might start with you. You're a really seasoned kids TV producer. How do you think children's television production has changed in the last decade, and where do you think it's headed in the future? Oh, we might have lost Suzanne there. Sherry, I might redirect that one to you, being in a position where you can both commission and then broadcast shows. Do you think there's been a shift?
Look, the whole landscape is shifting these days, and we're finding the trend with young viewers is that they will watch their favourite programs now on mobile tablets. So it's a huge challenge for a broadcaster like myself to try to adapt to that landscape, and some of the programs we do in-house and some that we commission, we look for that in all of them.
And just going on for that, do you think the kids' tastes are changing in terms of content?
I think kids still love comedy adventure, that's what we're finding, and also I guess a bit of a mystery whodunit type things where kids can be involved and try and guess what's happening. So it's more like they want to be more involved, no longer the passive viewers of the past.
And is that something that smartphone technology helps with, that content in the way it's consumed?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we try and make it a 360 so that you've got the program and then you've got the digital extension of that so they can actually be part of it.
I might ask Rebecca a question now. Rebecca, Screen Australia's recently released a comprehensive report into children's television, the Child's Play report we were talking about earlier. What do you think the impact of the CTS, the Children's Television Standards, have on children's television production?
Well, we know that it's really important that we maintain those requirements for children's programs. One of the things we looked at in that report was we did a survey along with the Australian Children's Television Foundation. Screen Australia conducted a survey of children and their parents to get an idea of their viewing habits, what they like, what their preferences are. And one of the things we found is that there is a preference for programs made specifically for children, which debunks a bit of a myth that was out there. If you look at the ratings data for children, it shows that there are peaks during those C&P periods, but the highest audience for children are very much in the prime time early evening slot when there's a lot of co-viewing going on with parents. So having some evidence to show that while children do love watching general audience programs, their preference is very much for programs made specifically for them. And the trend towards watching during that early evening period probably has a lot to do with the time that they have available, parental restrictions on things like being allowed to watch after dinner or after homework, and also parents the majority of parents in our survey promote family viewing, promote television viewing as a family activity. So all of those things sort of help to explain why the highest audience for children is in prime time, even though the preference of most children is for programs made specifically for them.
So Rebecca, are you saying that kids can actually differentiate between shows that might have a G classification for the family and shows that are made specifically for kids?
That's right, yeah. Part of the survey, we ensured that children knew how they were answering that question. So children were able to nominate from lists, they were actually able to nominate titles that they identified as being made for children compared to programs made for a general audience or programs made for adults.
Great, thanks Rebecca. I might ask Emma now, my colleague sitting next to me here. Emma, you're on the broadcasting standards section, and that's the team that assesses the C&P applications. And one of the classification requirements is that the program is made for a specific audience, like we were just talking about with Rebecca, which kids, can recognise. There's some other requirements as well. That show needs to be entertaining, it needs to be well produced, it needs to enhance a child's understanding and experience. Emma, do you think that there is some of these criteria that applicants find harder to address than others?
Whether or not an applicant has more trouble with one of the requirements than another would really be on a case-by-case basis. The important thing to note is that a good application's got to address them all. We've got to be able to tick off all of those requirements before we can grant classification. In a way, the requirements work together. So if something is made specifically for the target audience, that is conceived, developed and produced with that target audience in mind, it should follow that it does enhance their experience and their understanding. Similarly, if something is well produced, there are sufficient resources put into great casting, great script, etc., then hopefully it's going to be entertaining as well. Our lovely booklet that we're launching today does include tips and pointers for applicants. And we're also, as anybody who's put in an application, we hope knows we are approachable, so we can be contacted to help with questions that any applicants might have. And it is just to follow on, just to reiterate Rebecca's point about the difference between G and C&P classification. There is that difference between something being suitable for children in the sense that watching it shouldn't show them anything that harms or alarms them, and it's relatively mild in impact. That is to be distinguished from something that's made specifically with them in mind, themes that they're interested in, characters that might be of their age, etc.
So I guess on the other side of that application process, you're assessing applications. Someone like Suzanne is putting in the application. Suzanne, you've done some really successful applications over the years. What would be your advice to somebody that was doing one for the first time to make an effective application?
I think one of the reasons why we've been able to kind of hone in on doing these applications is we have a strong team here at SLR that do them, and I think that the success to the application is knowing the show you're making before you make the application. So knowing the characters, knowing the target audience, knowing who you are making it for is quite important, and having those stories already in mind so that when you make the application you can answer those questions that are required on the application.
And Emma, what about back to you again? Do you find that there's certain elements of an application that make it easier to process?
I absolutely, Suzanne's spot on. A strong program concept backed up by good research, and in order to do that, you've really got to know who you're pitching to. Clear and comprehensive information about how the program will meet the needs and interests of the target audience is really important. In this regard, coming in for a provisional classification could be really useful. That can be done in very early stages of production, so that if there are issues or if there are problems, they can be picked up before. You would all know better than us that it's an expensive exercise. So, in order to iron out problems early, applicants can come to us for a provisional C or a provisional P. We are also able to give a certain amount of informal feedback. Unfortunately, we're not resourced to give very, very detailed feedback in an informal sense. So either a provisional C or P is a good way to go in the early stages.
So Sherry Bodger from Network 10, I guess you have a unique perspective as well, because you've been in a position where you have applied for the CMP classification and also work as a broadcaster, and people come to you and pitch ideas. When people come to you with ideas about programs, do you find that there's any of those criteria that they, could be stronger in their applications for?
I think one of the things that jumps out at me is the fact that the pacing needs to be relevant to your child audience. Also, that using children in, say, magazine-style stories, they seem to be just used as props. They're not part of the storytelling, and I think the child's perspective has to be looked at in every one of those. They're probably the two things that jump out at me that I have identified in particular programs. And I notice with the new document, it goes into detail with those as well, which is great.
So that's in our new guide that we've produced. So hopefully, if people have questions about that, they can read up and help address that criteria in their applications. Sherry, again, we wouldn't have children's television without TV stations to play them on. Beyond putting shows to air, do you think that broadcasters have another role to help with the kids' television industry?
Well, I can only speak for the 10 network, obviously, but I think it's really important that kids still have access to Australian stories and Australia's multicultural society. I think it's really important that television is still there for them. When I hear people saying that television is on the way out, I think, what absolute rubbish. There will always be content, and there will always be good content for children, and whether they view it on multiple screens or whatever, it's all about the content.
Great, thanks for that. And Rebecca as well, you're from an industry body, Screen Australia. Australian children's television production is internationally well regarded, but it's still a relatively small part of the TV industry. How do you see the role of government organisations like Screen Australia and the ACMA in promoting the industry?
Well, I guess there are the government levers that are in place, which are direct funding through Screen Australia and the state agencies, regulation through Acma, and indirect funding through the offset are really important to help maintain those levels of children's production. We know that it's expensive to make, it's hard to get a budget together. Producers do rely on international finance to get their full budget, and we know from some of the Convergence Review findings that it's a vulnerable area. So without that continued support from those three levers of government, it is at risk. Suzanne would probably be able to talk more about the reliance on foreign finance has been pretty difficult in the last couple of years in particular, with finance drying up a little bit overseas with the current economic climate, and the level of the Australian dollar has also made it harder to get a full budget. When you do get some international finance, obviously it's worth a lot less to your whole budget. So it's important that in order to maintain levels of production, so Australian child audiences have access to content made specifically for them, those levers need to be maintained.
Great, thanks Rebecca. Well, I'd like to thank all our guests for joining me today in the ACMA Google Hangout. If you'd like to find out more about the children's television standards, you can download a copy of this guide, the Guide to Children's Television Classification, from the ACMA website. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks for watching.